And I was involved in the evaluation of an intervention program here in London, in one of the most deprived areas of all of England, where poverty is very high. We did run a resilience intervention program. So this is a 12-session program delivered by teachers that we trained in advance, and they try to teach the children to be more aware of the thoughts that they have, the negative interpretation. So it very much has a cognitive behavioral approach, being aware of their thoughts and being able to have an influence on how they think and how they interpret things. And they also learn about coping strategies and some positive psychology concepts about resilience, about post-traumatic growth, and so on. So this is a new intervention, very similar to other existing interventions, that we run in this a school that has only girls, with shockingly high depression scores. And we found that the intervention in general was successful. So children that did go through the intervention, their depression scores were lower and their resilience scores were higher. So they both benefited. They learned about resilience and they also learned to decrease their depression scores. And then I tried to check whether high sensitive personality would predict how strongly they respond to the intervention. And consistent with what I've expected, consistent with the hypothesis, consistent with differential susceptibility, or in that case vantage sensitivity, the bright side of differential susceptibility, I found that children, the girls that scored high on sensitive personality, were the ones that benefited from the intervention. They were the ones that had lower depression scores at the end. Now the important thing is, this is an experimental study. All children were at the same school. It's more than 150 children included in the study. And there was no difference before the intervention. So whether they had a high sensitive personality or not did not make a difference regarding their depression scores. So there was no difference before the treatment. The difference emerged over time. It was actually after the intervention stopped at the 6 months follow-up measure, where those that had a high sensitive personality had the lowest, significantly lower depression scores. And the depression scores looking at extreme groups were below the clinical cutoff, whereas those that had the low sensitive personality, they did not seem to respond to the intervention at all. So when we looked at the development of depression, actually it seemed to be going slightly up for the children that had a low sensitive personality. And for those that had high scores on high sensitive personality, the scores went down and were significantly different. And I think that's the important conclusion from this study is that an intervention as general as this one, this was just an intervention given to all the children, regardless of whether they struggle or not. But it was only a small proportion of the children that actually benefited from the intervention. And it was those with a high sensitive personality trait. All the other children did not respond to the same degree. And that's a very important finding when evaluating studies, because what we usually do in psychology, we run an intervention and then we look at the mean effect, the mean change across the whole group. So if we have 500 children, we would look at the average of these 500 in the beginning, and we would look at the average of whatever we're looking at the end of the intervention. And if the average is significantly different compared to a group of children that did not have the intervention, we would conclude the intervention is helpful or not helpful. In fact, what we were able to show with this study is that the mean effects could be misleading, because the effect could be very strong in a small sample, in a small subgroup of the children. It could be very strong, and it could be very small in another group of children. And you don't get this information when you look at average effects. And I think there's a lot of interest based on these findings and some other findings to look at predictors of response to treatment. And high sensitive personality may be one very helpful and easy to measure trait that might predict whether someone will respond to treatment or not. We don't really understand how environments work. We have ideas of what could be the mechanism of differential susceptibility, and obviously differential susceptibility or high sensitive personality refers to sensitivity to external influences. But every external influence is something that we perceive, and it's our perception that we respond to. So given that high sensitive personality is associated with intense internal processing of experiences and an intense internal life, I would expect that people that are highly sensitive, that they respond as well to their internal environment, not just to the external, and it's their perception that feeds information into how they should understand the situation. So I think that might explain why high sensitive personality seems to be associated with better response to psychotherapy, at least in the prevention program with the girls, because they might have internalized all the skills they learned more into their internal way of looking at the world and interpreting the world more easily than some other children might have.